So first, I'd like to introduce Martin Kuppinger, founder and principal analyst of KuppingerCole, author of many books regarding information security, and of course also frequent speaker, as many of you may know. Now, Zero Trust was coined by John Kinderweg back in 2010 as an approach to security that relies on concept of never trust, always verify. Martin mentioned that SolarWinds has taught us that traditional Zero Trust isn't enough. Consequently, we must extend the Zero Trust paradigm beyond networks, security systems, and identities and apply it to all types of software. Don't trust software, period. Welcome, Martin, to this panel.
Welcome, Bertolt.
Then I'd like to introduce John Tolbert, who is our managing director in the United States and also lead analyst with two topics in his focus, cybersecurity and identity and access management. So perfect candidate for this panel. And a quote of him I'd like to make is, Zero Trust architecture must transcend network layer thinking in order to be successful. Zero Trust architecture requires proper authentication and authorization for each session involving users, applications, networks, obviously including clouds and data. Happy to have you here, John, today.
Thanks. Hi, Bertolt. Hello, everyone.
And our third panelist, Alexei Bugansky, also analyst with KuppingerCole, and he has his special focus on both cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, and covers a big range of topics, including database security, API security, cryptography, and AI-based security automation. And he, of course, is also a regular author of reports, and he just recently wrote one about Zero Trust. And a quote of him is, AI and machine learning capabilities are key differentiators between IGA vendors today. And I'd like actually to make another quote of you because I really like that one, Alexei. It's probably because of your Russian background, because one of your quotes says, almost exactly 100 years before Zero Trust, Vladimir Lenin once said, the electron is just as inexhaustible as the atomic, nature is infinite. Well, it seems that this idea is just as applicable to the notion of Zero Trust over a decade after its conception. It keeps on giving. Very nice quote. Thank you for that. Welcome to the session.
Thank you, Bertolt. Hello, everyone.
Now, the first question, Martin, goes to you, and it sort of relates to the quote I just mentioned in relation to Alexei. We recently organized a group of, with a group of CISOs, a session with actually this John Kinderweg, who was the inventor of the term Zero Trust. And of course, Zero Trust concepts have evolved over time. What's your take after this discussion? And why do we need Zero Trust today?
Yeah, I think the take after the discussion is not that much different from what I had in mind before the discussion. And I think it's also what John in the discussion fully agreed in and also promoted, that the concept of Zero Trust has evolved, that it has many facets, that network security is essential, endpoint security is essential, but also identity and access, because at the end, that's what I also talked about previously in my keynote today, identity and access are so important. And last but not least, we don't need to stop. We must not stop. We must evolve the concept towards software security, and to understand also we can't trust software. We must secure and verify that area as well. And so it is still a concept in evolution. On the other hand, it has proven to be a very strong foundation for architecting your cybersecurity infrastructure and environment of the future.
Yeah, thank you for that. Alexei, is zero trust an idea? Is it a feature, or is it a product, or something else?
Well, I guess that's the greatest point of zero trust as a notion, is that it resonates on all levels. This is why it's been so popular for, well, actually not even 10 years, but like almost 20, because although the term is only like 12 years old now, the ideas behind it have definitely appeared in the early 2000s. And the point is that zero trust as a philosophy is a kind of profound way to explain like what have we been doing wrong in the area of cybersecurity for so many years, and how do we fix all of those problems. If you go higher, yes, it actually gives us a set of very practical recommendations, the tenets of zero trust, like what do we have to fix, how do we fix it. And then as a cherry on top, it actually sounds like a pretty interesting, intriguing buzzword. This is why it's so beloved by marketing people and the customers around the world. And the biggest challenge for everyone is to understand the difference between all those levels of abstraction, if you will. Because if you only start thinking about zero trust in networking, or even if, as Martin just mentioned, you only focus on software security, you won't reach that goal. You have to think on a very broad and kind of big picture, large scale architecture level.
I think that makes sense. Thank you for that. Now, John, I know that at the end of last year, beginning of this year, you very much looked also into what happened in the SolarWinds incident. But what can we learn from that incident, and how does this relate to zero trust?
Oh, that's quite the big topic. You know, I think one of the lessons that I've taken away from that is that for a long time, I think people in IT look at some of the, you know, the outlier cases in security as being things that, you know, that's a very sophisticated attack and nobody's thought of it. That would take such a level of effort. Nobody would try it. But, you know, with SolarWinds and some of these other attacks like the Exchange server thing that followed soon thereafter, we see that it's supply chain security that we really need to be worried about, the IT supply chain. And the attackers are realizing that they get much more value out of their attacks the higher up in the supply chain that they go. If you look at specifically SolarWinds, the number of impacted customers was huge. And same thing with the Microsoft Exchange server attack. It's just taking it one level up and being able to compromise far more victims. And from a zero trust perspective, I think this also exposes why and where zero trust would have at least made it much harder for the attackers to have been successful in those attempts if there had been, you know, proper authentication, proper authorization in place for all the different resources that were affected.
Yeah, and I think it added a new approach for how to enable lateral movement, so to speak, in the sense of it was a different way to pass the door into the organizations that were then finally under attack. Instead of going through the firewall, it was going through the software, and then again lateral movement happened in these targeted organizations. And again, this goes back to the zero trust notion. So never trust, always verify. And there were, at the end of the day, in many of the affected organizations, there were obviously too few verifications at the end, because everyone trusted something and it turned out, okay, it was a bad idea to trust them.
But I guess it still opens one kind of additional aspect to think about, like who watches the watchman? What if someone managed to sneak a backdoor into the actual, like, quote unquote, zero trust enforcement product, be it a part of your identity management architecture or some kind of a network security, microsegmentation? What if those tools become compromised? How do you add the meta second level of zero trust on top of that?
Yeah, that brings us to layered security. That brings us to, we need multiple elements, and zero trust is not to find something else, a single element to trust instead of the firewall. It's to use the firewall, to use the identity management, to use analytics, to use elements in network segmentation, and also to combine the perspectives on across systems to understand, oh, there might be something going wrong. And I think that is the risk of saying, okay, maybe if we add a CASB or if we add that, then we are done. No, that's not true. It will always be the combination and this concept of multi-layered security from the identity and the device to the data, and that will help us to get better. And we never will be 100% secure.
Mm-hmm. Now, John, I know that you are concerned in your research around identity and access management a lot around authentication and authentication authorization. So what kinds of authentication mechanisms are organizations using to achieve strong authentication?
You know, I think it depends on the use case, the value of the resources, you know, the mechanisms that are available. I think, you know, for high security use cases, we've had things like hard tokens for a long time, and they will continue to be popular in certain scenarios. You know, but there's also this consumerization of IT that we've been seeing going on for the last few years, where enterprise workers realize that, hey, there are different ways of authenticating that are less troublesome, you know, when I'm conducting, you know, personal business from home. So there are, excuse me, like mobile application mechanisms that don't necessarily require passwords, because we do know that passwords are problematic from a security perspective. Same thing with the knowledge-based authentication, security questions, you know, for recovering accounts. Those things are not really good for security. So I would say, you know, mobile apps, mobile biometrics have become, you know, much more accepted in lots of different contexts, both from the consumer side as well as increasingly now in the enterprise with FIDO2 and WebAuthn being able to integrate, you know, mobile authentication with your Windows Hello and also to various websites as well. So I think that, you know, moving in the direction of using a mobile device where possible is definitely good, because then you can leverage things like, you know, secure SDKs and those native biometrics.
Mm-hmm. Martin, topic of the conference is around IGA, and IGA is a very mature concept, perhaps even product. It goes around lifecycle management, who has access, which resources, etc., all the known stuff. Obviously, we have to get this right. But how does zero trust come into the equation of IGA? What kind of role does zero trust play here?
Or the other way around. At the end of the day, so we need to manage identities. We need to manage the accounts. We need to assign entitlements. We need to implement governance. We need to use AI-based approaches for access governance that identify outliers, anomalies in the entitlements, that start looking at user behavior. So that there are a lot of elements where IGA helps there. On the other hand, I think it's also this, we need to enforce security, and this is part of what we do in IGA at many places. And so both topics are tightly related. I would dare to say there's no successful zero trust without a strong IAM, also with strong processes you have in place, with good policies you have in place. And so on the other hand, zero trust also is a driver for modernizing what you do in IGA when it comes to go beyond traditional role-based access to policy-based access, when it comes to just-in-time provisioning, when it comes to more, let's see, be careful with AI, but more analytics-based approaches on looking at where are entitlements, where are risks, etc. And so I think zero trust is also pushing IGA modernization at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So Alexei, what's your view on that? Is it, from your perspective, possible to build some kind of zero trust architecture without strong IAM? And what, if so, what would that mean?
Well, let me kind of give you a controversial opinion for a second. Absolutely, it is possible. A typical trivial example: you have a computer, you store some data on it, you shut it down, you unplug the network cable, you have a perfectly zero trust environment, which is completely impenetrable. The only question is like, how much use do you get from that? Like, unfortunately, for real life scenarios, you have to implement something more usable, both from a kind of user experience and productivity perspective, as John just mentioned, in such aspects as multi-factor authentication, adaptive, policy-based, real-time, like this is the point, real-time access decisions. And yes, the same applies to identity governance as well. Like, it has to be real-time, it has to be smart, it has to be a continuous process and not like quarterly review. So zero trust is all about making it continuous, smart, and automated, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John, how can we avoid zero trust disappointment? So what are the things? So what would you to do in order to avoid disappointment?
Well, I think start with realizing that zero trust is not embodied in a single product or a single service, and that it takes a while to get there. It begins, I think, with looking at the entirety of your architecture, not forgetting that there are cloud aspects there, and then probably other things that other shadow IT things may be going on. So take a holistic look at your architecture, and then start by upgrading some of the core services that can provide zero trust, like your authentication and authorization, and things like microsegmentation on the network side are still valid. But then also consider the application side. How are your applications able to consume authentication, authorization information, and applying that too at the data level, where you're deciding which data objects are of a higher value and need to be protected differently than, say, some of the defaults. So it's a long process, and it's one that you're never really done with, because it requires near constant reevaluation too. So set your expectations such that you're in this for the long haul, and you won't be disappointed.
Mm-hmm. Martin, to that point, obviously, companies are not starting on the green field. Many customers have already invested big time in other security solutions. How will zero trust affect those investments? Do they have to throw away everything and make everything new, or what's your advice here?
Yeah, I think the problem of many organizations, I try to keep it short. I could probably spend the next hour on that, but that would kill the agenda. Keep it short. The problem is, or the situation is not a problem. The situation is most organizations have a slew of cybersecurity tools, and zero trust sort of brings in the impression we need even more, and probably you need some more, but you also need to think about which may you retire. So go and start with a portfolio analysis. Think about, from the big picture John talked about, to which deliver most to security compared to the cost, the effort they have. Which elements do you need to combine to stay within budgets, to deliver the best in security you can do? So this is, from my perspective, really one of the essential starting points, this portfolio assessment, and then moving from there into a roadmap and to well-executed planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So let's do a final round, perhaps, and the challenge will be limit your answer to ideally one sentence, and then we make that a brief round. So Alexei, what is your number one advice how should companies start in Zero Trust? How should they start their journey?
First of all, trust no one. As is, trust no vendor and do not trust their labels. Look for specific capabilities, understand how those capabilities address your business challenges, and well, do not hesitate to reach out for help and guidance. Not necessarily to KuppingerCole, but at least to people whose job is to help you.
Yeah, thank you. John, number one pitfall when implementing Zero Trust?
It's probably thinking that it is something easy that you can do by just, rolling out one or two products that say that there's zero trust. It's more of a lifestyle change. It's more of an architectural decision and perspective that you have to take. So look at it as, in many cases, a large effort to get there.
Mm-hmm. And finally, to you, Martin, what's the best advice you would give people who have not yet started to look into Zero Trust? How should they prepare for this, important new step?
How should I prepare? I think the most important thing is really in cybersecurity, never act in panic mode or in headless chicken mode, but follow the plan you have made.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, that sounds reasonable. Yeah. Thank you all. I think we have come to the end of our session. It was interesting. We could have talked for another couple of minutes or even hours. I know that that you know so much about this topic that we could spend all day and on the rest of the session for it. But thank you for your insights. It was a pleasure, and I hand it back to Annie.